airplane sales. That is, the used market is strong in our airplane. Probably 50–60% of the velocities flying are second owner airplanes. The first owner's died or lost his medical and so forth. So you're going to see a lot of those on the market. You can buy them fairly cheap. We would prefer you build your own, but we understand the reality of this game. One of the difficulties of any aircraft manufacturer, unless they come out with a new product, is people buying their used airplanes. You become your own competitor, your worst competitor, and that's just the way it works. Years ago, I decided the only way to survive in this business is to provide something different, something new every once in a while, something different in our airplane, provide services that nobody else provide. For instance, we do the maintenance, we do flight training, we do a lot of things over and above just selling airplanes. You'd never survive in this business just selling kits. It's just not possible because there's not that much business out there. When we started years ago, that's not true because we were selling 60 airplanes a year, and that's a lot of airplanes for a little kit manufacturer. So there's a lot of airplanes out there, and there's a variety of quality, but most of them you're going to see are 10 years old or older. We've got airplanes that were sold by Danny Mayer in the late 80s that have never been finished, and they're available, some of them. Well, do you want to buy an airplane that's been sitting around for that many years? Probably not, but it'll be cheap. Things are cheap when they're not worth very much, and that's the way it works. So, what do we look for when an airplane comes into us? The guy has bought the airplane, sometimes sight unseen. He brings it in and he says, could you guys either make this a flyable airplane since it's partially done, or fix it because it's not working properly? We see it all the time. We have one over there right now that I believe it was bought sight unseen, wasn't it? The one that's in the production building? The fellows come in on the weekend and work on it? The one with the wings that are all messed up.
Yeah, that's Dave's. He was here earlier.
Dave here? Okay. Anyway, we have one next door that he wants us to help him build the airplane. And he's from the Orlando area, so it isn't very far for him to come over. It's usually him and his son. They come over and work on the weekends. The wings, whoever done the wings, didn't sand the wing before they started applying the fillers. The wing is something that's built from the inside out, whereas the fuselage is built from the outside in. So we put it in a mold. The outside surface is smooth. The wings, you're starting from the center and working out, therefore the outside is going to be rough because that's fiberglass. And before you put the micro on there, you have to sand the surface, rough it up so the micro will stick. We get these wings in there, and there's blotches that big around where the micro is just flaked off. Well, how are you going to fix it? It's not an easy fix because you either try to blend it in with new micro, which then means that the micro that was there is probably going to flake off in the future, or you scrape it all off. And that's what we had to do. Now, we showed the owner basically what he's going to have to do, and he's working on the weekends. People who build here have a key to the building. They can come in and work any day they want, work at night, I don't care. They have a key to the building. So we get ready to micro the wings after he had finished getting all the stuff off. And there's gouges where he actually broke the surface of the fiberglass into the foam. So it's not a soft spot because now the glass come back, but the foam underneath's got a little crease in it because he was using a chisel and a hammer. I mean, that's one way to get it off, but it had to be repaired. So we had to cut those sections out, refill them, and then glass them. So it was a lot of extra work, and obviously, if the guy had known that up front, he may have not bought the airplane. Now, that one was not too far along in the process of building it. But we see airplanes in here that are finished. We have one over there right now that the builder of the airplane said it's the best built airplane ever. built in the life of airplanes. He's 90-some years old now. He built the airplane probably when he started, 75, something like that. And he's kind of strong-willed. He wants top dollar for his airplane. And he said, well, could you guys go ahead and certify the engine overhaul? How do you certify an engine overhaul? Well, the problem was that he had a friend overhaul his 300-horse Lycoming, and before the paperwork was ever started, the mechanic died. He has no proof that the engine was ever overhauled. And he said, well, I paid a lot of money to this guy, cash. I have no documentation that he had done anything. So he had opened the logbook, engine logbook, and he said, engine overhauled. Now, how are you going to sell that airplane? How are you going to convince the next owner that it's a quality overhaul? I don't know how. I mean, I'm an A&P mechanic, and I wouldn't know how to complete that sale. So people who have been interested in the airplane, you have to tell them up front that there's no documentation on this overhaul. Well, now what do? The owner says it was overhauled. The buyer says, well, I'm not going to pay for an overhaul, but there's no documentations. So what do? The airplane's still here. So how many years been here? 3, 4?
Coming up on 3.
3 years. We can't sell it. He wants too much money for it because he spent probably $15,000 to a mechanic that done the overhaul, maybe $20,000. I don't know. He said, well, it's got new this, it's got new that. Well, where's the tags? If you put a new camshaft in an airplane, you should have the yellow tag or the service tag that went with that camshaft. Now, I don't know if it's even got a new camshaft. I have no clue because there's no documentations on anything. It could be a great overhaul. The engine may last 2,000 hours. We just don't know. So how you gonna convince somebody?
So the answer to that is sign it off before he starts in case he dies halfway through.
Yeah, that's a possibility. How would you guys handle that? You got any suggestions? Yes, sir.
Well, isn't there a way to disassemble it and look to make sure it got overhauled and micrometer everything? And I'm just guessing here.
Tear down.
For discussion.
Another 15 grand.
Well, you'd have to pay for that,
Well, yeah, I know, but that's one avenue.
and he don't want to pay for it. I can guarantee you.
I had one way we did that on an aircraft engine. There's certain things you can't do. For example, the cam, the crank, things along that line. But as far as the appliances go, you can very easily go back to, if it wasn't just an individual shop, you can go back to where the mags were overhauled, and they'll have a shop ticket that will relate to that.
Don't have any of that. There's absolutely zero documentation other than one entry in the logbook that says engine overhauled. And the owner of the airplane signed it, not the mechanic.
Just pay for a tear down and a new sign off.
Who's going to pay for that?
Well, that's you're the salesman, so
I
either
wouldn't pay
convince
for
the
it.
buyer or the owner.
We don't make any money on this stuff to justify us paying for it. The owner won't pay for it. He wants more money for the airplane than it's worth.
Wait for an estate sale and you get the airplane much cheaper.
That's exactly what we're waiting for. He's 90-some years old now, I think.
95, I think.
95.
Yeah, so it did.
His kids would
I
say,
find out.
sell that airplane for anything. And we don't care what it is.
Something money in
So,
the bank.
I'm
better
sorry,
than
wait, so what are you going to do when he dies? You're going to try to sell the airplane for less, or are you going to tear down the
As long, no, I ain't going to touch it.
Oh.
He don't want to pay for a hanger. Didn't want to pay for a cover. And the interior is all greenish colored because of the moisture we have here in the air.
Oh my!
It's just a mess.
So you have
It's
an
a mess.
you have an unreasonable seller.
I have an unreasonable seller and an unwanted buyer, a buyer that didn't want to spend the money. And I personally, I wouldn't buy the airplane no matter what the price was because there's too many things wrong that would have to be fixed. And how do you go about that? Maybe you guys got a suggestion. I mean, what price would you pay for that airplane to feel comfortable? XL, RG, 300-horse Lycoming that has recently been overhauled.
5K.
You would have to break it all down, though, and check everything. I don't know.
Core values.
Did you guys check
Yeah,
the
core values about it.
structure, the assembly, the velocity part of it?
There's unless the builders, or unless the seller says, could you check this all out before you sell it? Yeah, we could do that. If he says, but I'm not going to pay for it, take it out of the commission when you sell it. Well, how are you going to do that if you can't document it and he won't reduce the price because of it?
But there's a way you can.
Yeah, one way we said was just come pick up the airplane because we just can't do it. We can't make any money on it, and we can't sign off a logbook saying it's had a conditional inspection because then we're liable if the engine blows up the next time the airplane is flown. How do you do that? We're stuck between a rock and a hard spot. But you, as a potential owner of that airplane, would have to look at it and say, now, do I really want to stick my neck in this thing, or do I want to walk away from it? And
Has it completed phase one?
I'm sorry?
Has it completed phase one? Phase one testing, is it completed there?
Yeah, it's got about,
35 hours on it or so.
it's got enough to,
Actually, when we first got the plane here, we went through the entire thing, did some cooling work, and it had some changes that needed to be made, and then it sat for a while because the market was soft, and then other issues developed with. Well, we actually did go through a full conditional inspection with it, but there was maybe 20% of the yellow tags, and some were missing. And one of the conversations he had was, well, I know those were in there because I remember arguing with my buddy that the through bolts for the case, he wanted to put new ones in, and I didn't want to pay for them. Well, that's a great story, but it's a $30,000 if you have to take the engine out and overhaul it.
The point you have to make there is, again, this is caveat emptor, and so
Well, it's a learning experience from the standpoint. They used to take a few years ago. If a guy wanted, like you have an airplane, you wanted us to broker it, bring it in. If you don't want to pay for inspection, we'll just advertise it and so forth. Nowadays, and his was kind of that last one. We got in the used aircraft sales mostly because, again, another avenue because we don't make a lot off of it, hardly make it anything worth our time type thing. When one comes in, it has to go through a full inspection. If the owner doesn't want to complete, which the owner has to pay for, it goes through a full squawkless repair. Now, if it's like a screw off, one of the window cover type things, or vanity piece, not a big deal. But if we feel it's going to make the airplane sell, it has to be done. If you don't want to do it, you take the airplane back. So, for example, we have the clamshell one over there. You can look at that. That one's pretty much spotless inside and out. The owner put a new firewall on, did a bunch of stuff. So some guys are willing to do that, but again, if the market's soft, you don't want to have $80,000 invested in your airplane and get $60,000 for it. Take that Mazda one over there, for example. The guy probably has to.
they wouldn't know it's a Mazda. It's not a Mazda now.
Well, okay, the one. He talked about it during the. Anybody went to the conditional inspection? Because that's the one they did the example on. That owner has $300,000 in that airplane between buying it at 2007 or 2008, where the market peaked, and then he just dumped $80,000 into that airplane with the engine install kit, and a brand new MT prop. He's going to get $90,000 back out of that airplane. So
As a max.
right. So convincing, somebody to spend more money in an airplane to sell it, and that's true for all airplanes. We have an Aztec over there. It's a good friend of Duane. Same thing.
but you're
You
going
might want to buy an Aztec, by the way.
But you guys get yourself into a trouble when you take those kind of projects on because everybody expects the factory to sell a reasonable airplane again.
Absolutely. We had a guy, we had an airplane for sale, and we advertised it, honestly. And the guy came from California, and he got really upset because it wasn't perfect. I mean, he wanted a perfect airplane. You can't find perfect airplanes, and he went home upset, wasn't it? We ultimately sold it, but he was very upset that it wasn't a perfect airplane. And now we didn't advertise it as perfect, but that was what he is expecting because we are Velocity, expected a perfect airplane. So we have to be careful what we do, but you have to be careful too, because we didn't build some of these airplanes, most of them. A builder built it, and he's on the data plate as the manufacturer, which takes the liability away in part from me, and it puts it on a guy that died, for instance. Well, how are you going to? If there's something wrong with the airplane, who are you going to go after? You're not going to go after somebody that's passed away, that's for sure. So you've got to be diligent in your research of an airplane to determine that it is okay, and that's hard to do because if you're not a builder and you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to buy things that aren't good. They're not airworthy. And you can't expect us to take a piece of junk and make it good. It just can't be done. As I told you earlier about airplanes that come in that want an annual inspection, and we get into them and we find things that are so bad that it would cost the guy a fortune for us to make it what we consider airworthy, or something that we would want to put our signature on as a mechanic to give it a conditional inspection, like ripcord in the airplane. You know. We've had them come in. We've had airplanes come in with wiring, all the wiring, over top of the canard with no terminal, no way to disconnect it. So the only way you can get the canard off is to cut all those wires off, and there's 40 wires, all white. You know, and how are you going to do that? How are you going to do a conditional inspection? How are you going to do any work on the retract gear if you can't take the canard off? You can't. So the only option was take your airplane home. We can't work on it. We can't do a conditional inspection on an airplane that's this bad.
What is the cost for an inspection, pre-purchase inspection normally?
Well,
Reasonably, I mean.
yeah, I know. You're looking at probably $1,000, somewhere in that area. But you can't do everything on a preconditioning. I mean, for instance, the guy says, could you come and look at this airplane? Just tell me whether it's okay. Well, what do? We can look at an airplane. We can say it looks okay. Usually we can look inside of things and say, well, it was, marginally built. You can look at resins that's running all over the place and say, well, that shouldn't be, things that are either unairworthy to begin with, things that we wouldn't use in an airplane, or just bad workmanship. And we can sometimes see that, but not always. How can you see inside of a wing that's painted? We don't know what kind of condition it might be.
Or a streak.
Or a streak. Does it leak? Has he ever had it full fuel? We don't know. I know of one case, fortunately we caught it ahead of time, but there are instructions on how to mount the canard, the winglet onto the wing. It's a right angle, basically, on a single-engine airplane. It's a right angle. And there's layups that go in here, and there's layups that go in here, and there's layups that go inside, so that it's a stiff, complete assembly. Problem is that there's also instructions on how to make that winglet. And the instructions are you take unidirectional cloth, and you lay it along the leading edge going this way, and the trailing edge going this way, so there's a cross. Well, uni doesn't sometimes bend like it should. So we get a wing in here, an airplane in here, where he trucked it in, where he's built his wings, and the unidirectional, which is strength in one direction only, and that's where the lines are, and that's why it's done this way. They're all this way. There's no vertical structure to hold this thing together. And fortunately, he had one side finished, the other side unfinished. And that's how we caught it. I said, what is this? And he said, well, it's a whole lot easier to do it this way than it is this way.
Makes sense.
I mean, you look at things like that and you say, how many airplanes are actually flying that might have been built that way? We don't know. Once it's painted, there's no way of knowing whether they did it correctly or not. I know in one case, on a Long Easy, he did exactly the same thing, and the winglet broke off, and he was killed. The pilot was killed.
I heard about that one.
And they found out that he had done his unidirectionals this way, which has no strength, instead of this way, which has all the strength. So it's things like that you can't tell on a used airplane. If you build it yourself, you know, and you're the names on there as a builder, and you're taking the risks. Once you sell it, you're passing those risks on to somebody else and their family and so forth. So it's one of those things that we got to be careful of, and so do you. Yeah.
So what are the top 10 things that a prospective buyer should inspect on a plane that they're considering purchasing?
Carry on, John.
Your turn.
Yeah, your
Don't
turn.
do it. Well, most of the problems we usually see are going to be more rigging's a big one. I hear a lot of guys coming in all the time that they always say, because they never came in and learned how the plane flew from a transition standpoint, And the guy they bought it from took him for a ride in the airplane and said, this is how it's going to land. And they'll bring it in to us and say it's a great airplane, but, and you'll ask them how it's flying, or you'll go flying with them. Scott learned a long time ago of just, you don't hop in an airplane because it flew in. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good airplane. But we'll hear all the time that, well, I have to land at 110 knots over the fence in order to actually, otherwise the canard stalls. Well, to us, that's a red flag instantly that something's wrong. So rigging's a big one, control throws, gear systems. Rick talked about wiring. That's a huge one from not as much of an operation standpoint, but a maintenance standpoint. Everybody knows that, there's certain parts of an engine that the rest of the airplane's built around. Anybody that has a turbocharged Continental knows that big time, where you basically have to disassemble the engine to take an adapter drive off. So that's a big one as far as future maintenance. People don't think about that. Same thing with, there's certain build layups that we pay particular attention to, or at least I know I do when I go do like a walkthrough for a test flight. The canard lift tabs, the upper quarter-inch bolts, if you can grab those by hand and rip it off, which it's a pretty simple layup, but it's a 90-degree layup, then you start inspecting other stuff pretty closely. So people standing in between layers, Scott talked about that in the composite workshop. Blind layup, so if you look, shoot a flashlight down through the strake area where it glasses to the spar, if that layup's either not there or it looks pretty poor, then you start, you get a flathead screwdriver and shove it underneath the layup, and if it pops off, or, you start looking at other stuff really closely. We've actually had one airplane, a bad airplane will still fly. It's amazing what our airplane will actually do. We had one airplane one year come into Oshkosh. Must have been 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I already told them that, so they may have not been here for that conversation. But John couldn't repeat it.
Well, the owner.
He was an airline pilot or something.
Yeah, he's an airline pilot. That's the best part. Those sometimes are the most dangerous pilots. He ended up.
Now, Wolf.
Yeah. He flew all the way from Texas with this airplane. The airplane had 550 hours on it or something like that, so it must be a great airplane. And he was so proud. He bought it used. Had a brand new paint job done to it before he went to pick up the airplane. He never saw it before. Paid the guy, had the paint job done. He says, you got to come look at my airplane. It's beautiful, new interior, paint, and everything. So we went over, and he started saying, I got some flight questions for you because it was him and a friend taking off out of a 10,000-foot strip in Texas somewhere, full of fuel. He goes, I had to abort my first takeoff, and I asked him why. He goes, well, I couldn't rotate, so I had to have my friend get in the back of the airplane, and we did it again and finally got airborne. Flew all the way to Oshkosh.
Oh, God.
I walk out to the airplane, and normally it sits like this. Well, it was kind of laying like this from a distance, and you can take your finger, push it to the winglet to the ground, and it will come back up. On the retracts, you have gear sockets. Gear sockets were never installed in this airplane. So that was, mistake number one. So it's one of those that, your airplane should be look right from the get-go. The seat backs were upside down backwards.
All the seats.
Like, how you have a pan that the foam goes in? No, you were sitting on raw fiberglass with some leather on it. And then the backrest normally comes up and kicks forward. His went up and back. So that was
I
another
forgot
giveaway.
that part.
We look underneath the instrument panel. The instrument panel is held up with a 1-inch wood dowel. It's actually not bolted to anything. The wires are kind of holding it in place. And then I'm trying to figure out the rotation issue, because that's what he was complaining about. He didn't complain about anything else with the airplane, just the rotation issue. I move in the stick forward, and the elevator's going up and down maybe an inch, like total throw. But the stick has full throw. I look under there, and the center hinge bracket's moving forward and back. It's broken loose out of the canard. So we had to disassemble it and fix it up there. But that, I had 500 hours of flying that way. How long the elevator was broken, nobody knows. But it's amazing what guys will actually fly. Wow. As a mechanic used to say that worked for us, shit does fly. But
He still works for us.
yeah. But I would say, the things that are going to be the most expensive with our airframe are going to be the engine and the prop, obviously. The airframe, everything but the spar is fixable. We have had guys before building the airplane. Since I've been working here, we've only had one guy destroy a spar that I know of. There's been two overall. One guy actually shipping his airplane cut the strakes off and wanted to glue them back on when he got to his destination. well, you have a through spar there.
It wouldn't fit in his 8-foot truck, so he made it fit by cutting off
Strakes.
the strakes. Cut them off with a chainsaw. And go in the truck. And then he wanted to know how he calls us and said, now how do I fix the spar and the strakes so that it's flyable? Things like that.
Buy a new kit.
He didn't ask first, though, did he?
No. In line with that, I'm going to tell you one more story. That it was a Canadian. You got a Canadians in here, don't we? Canadian.
Have an Englishman first.
Okay, yeah. We get this airplane down here from Canada that he had sold to another fella in Florida here, and they wanted us to do a conditional inspection on it. And so we do our conditional inspection, and we were having some squeaking noises when you lift the wing up and down. And squeak, 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 squeak. And so we decided to take the wing off and see what was going on, because the bolts were tight and everything. And we look into the wing strake. Now, you have to have been a builder of this airplane or know what you're looking for. But there's a carry-through spar that goes through the fuselage, and then the strakes go on top of and the bottom of this carry-through spar. They're glassed onto the spar, and then the fuel baffle is maybe 8 inches to a foot in front of that spar, and that's the fuel baffle is a straight line, so the fuel doesn't go aft, because that carry-through spar angles aft after it leaves the fuselage, which means if you made your fuel go back there and you raise the nose, that fuel would be in an area where we don't want it to be. So, after you get that fuel strake, the aft fuel baffle in there, and you get the top down, then you got to put little baffles. They're actually fiberglass parts that go from the carry-through spar to that aft baffle. There's 3 of them in there. And so we take the wing off, and there's none in there. They're gone. And so the guy that bought the airplane contacts the owner and says, why don't you have them in there? The factory says we got to put them back in there. He said, well, I looked at it, and it didn't look like it needed them to me. That was the answer. Now, how would you know that was a problem if you bought a used airplane? You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know what kind of glassing was done. You wouldn't know any of that. In that same regard, this is a gruesome story, but I got to talk to you about it because I was an investigator of an accident that happened out in Kansas. We get a call that one of our airplanes had disintegrated in air. It crashed into an oil field in Kansas. And the NTSB and the Lycoming representative want to know if I go with him out there because the airplane came out of the sky on fire and crashed. Obviously killing the pilot, nobody else in the airplane. And so I went out there with the NTSB and the FAA to investigate the airplane. And the wing was maybe a quarter of a mile, each wing, quarter of a mile away from the wreckage. And the intent of the Lycoming guy being in there was because of the fire. Okay, is they going to get Lycoming going to be sued because there was a fire created by the engine and that's why the airplane came out of the sky? Or was it something else that the NTSB could identify as the reason for this airplane coming out of the sky? And what we discovered, among other things, was that a non-IFR rated pilot had left this airport in Kansas on the way back to Florida. He lived in Melbourne, I think. Anyway, he'd left Kansas, total fuel, filled it up at an aircraft stop, filled it up with fuel, and took off with 300-foot ceilings, the tops at 9,000, and thunderstorms. And later, conversation with his son said he does it all the time. So I told him he was going to kill himself if he didn't stop doing dumb things like that. But he had set the autopilot and sit back and relax until he got on top, and then fly to the destination. But that may or may not have a contributing factor, but it certainly didn't help because the radar showed that he had made a couple of U-turns trying to evidently find a way out of this stuff because there was a lot of storms going on. And he either lost control or he had died because he was a very, very heavy smoker in his 80s, young 80s, and was using oxygen. He had an oxygen tank in there. And they think maybe he was breathing oxygen, chain smoker. Maybe he lit up a cigarette or something. But for whatever reason, the airplane came out of the sky. And here's what we found. And it never became an NTSB report because all they wanted to say is that a BFR pilot flew into adverse weather and lost control of the airplane. But when we looked at the airplane, and I took a lot of pictures, there is a method in which you're attaching your strakes to this carry-through spar that we just talked about. And it's the strakes are lapped over top and under the bottom side of this carry-through spar. And once that's done, first of all, when you put the strakes on there, you sand that surface, rough it up so that there's a good bond between the strake and the bottom carry-through spar in the top. What he had done is not sand it, first of all. The second thing you're asked to do in the manual is to fiberglass between the fuel strakes and the spar. It's glass. They attach permanently the strakes to the spar. I mean, that makes sense, correct? Okay? When I got to the investigation site, half of the carry-through spar was still attached to the airframe. The other half was attached to the wing, to the strake, which came off with the wing. So the strake pulled off the airplane, pulling half of the strake. The other half is sitting there, just sticking out from the fuselage. It just slid off because, first of all, he had done no sanding on this spar. He had done no glass layups on the inside or outside. The only thing bonding the strake to the spar was whatever material, like epoxy, that he had put between the two. And when he got into turbulence, when the wing separated, it of course exposed the fuel. That's what caused the fire. But the wing actually slid out from the strakes. It just slid away from it, as if it wasn't ever attached, because in a sense it wasn't. Whatever turbulence he got into caused that wing to separate from the airplane, from the rest of the airplane, and it just slid out. I mean, it was so obvious when we took some pictures of it that he just did a bad job of building his airplane. Now, the question to you would be, had it not crashed and you had bought his airplane, would you have known that he had done it wrong? You can't see it. You just can't see it. Unless you pull the wing off, get a flashlight, and get in there and look. You can at least see the glass layups. And there's also a large glass layup that's triax right at the end of the carry-through spar that goes on the inside and back. So it's really making that spar as part of the strake. The strake and the spar are a part of the airplane. It's not something that you want to screw around with, and you don't want to do it wrong. That's important. But the airplane is strong enough that it would take just about anything he could have given it. This turbulence, maybe, if he didn't get into a heavy thunderstorm or something, would have survived it. But in this case, the wing came off, and it spiraled down.
The wing came off.
The strake came off with the wing.
Because the wing's bolted with the 3 bolts.
The two outboard bolts held half the spar to the strake and the wing, and it came off.
Oh, it came off.
Yeah, it just slid off. Obviously, once that wing comes loose, all the load was on the spar at that point, and just broke it off.
Oh, okay.
Just broke it in two. But with the engine on fire, because all that fuel's coming out of the strake, spiraled out. Now, one of the things they also discovered was that he always carried oxygen. He always used oxygen almost any altitude because he had breathing problems as a chain smoker. They never could find the oxygen tank. They looked everywhere, and it just wasn't anywhere. So they think maybe he had lit up a cigarette while he's on oxygen and exploded, and that might have been what caused it. But what I'm trying to get to is he had made some big errors in the building of his airplane, that there was no way, unless you pulled a wing, to ever find out that he had made those mistakes. And even if you pulled the wing, you'd have to be able to know what to look for. You'd have to be able to get up in there and look for those glass layups and determine that, okay, it's okay or it's not. But what I'm trying to say is be very diligent if you're going to buy a used airplane, Velocity or any other experimental, that there could be builder errors that are not, you're not capable of finding. And I don't want to scare you because we have a lot of you guys that already bought used airplanes. So it's not that it's a common thing to find, but we find them because we're looking for them. Yeah.
Have you got a cigarette I can bum off of you?
I don't smoke. Well, you understand what I'm saying?
So yes, sir.
Okay. Now this guy was a nice guy. He was a friendly guy, and I knew him pretty well. He used to joke about his name, that when he died, he wanted nothing on his tombstone. And I said, well, why not? Guess what his name was?
Nothing.
His name was Odd.
Oh.
And he said, I want people to walk by and say, ooh, that's odd. O-D-D. Odd. Or O-D, I forgot. Anyway. Go ahead, John. Tell them anything else you might have found.
Well, on the spar area, because I'll get into that anyway. One area that you're not going to find. This is one also reason that we're here to talk about pre-buys. When somebody calls us, wants us to do a we actually don't do pre-buys on airplanes anymore. The only thing we'll do is full conditionals, and because there's certain things you will find on a conditional that you won't find, like you're not going to do. Normally, you're not going to do an oil change on a pre-buy because somebody doesn't want to, necessarily do a full oil change.
I'm sorry, could you tell us the difference between the two? I don't quite understand that.
Most mechanics will tell you the initials in the logbook is what you're paying for. We have one guy here that's an IA on the field. For example, for the Aztec he was talking about, wants $3,000 for the inspection. If he just signs it off, he wants $3,000. Or if he spends 5 days working on it, he wants $3,000. So for us, it's the oil change. There's a little more that goes into it. Part of it was because it's also you got guys that we do the pre-buy. I think at the time we charged $800 for it. You get done with the pre-buy inspection, and they would say, well, sign it off as an annual, because if you're saying it's a good airplane, you might as well sign it off as an inspection. So we just basically did away with that, and you don't have different tiers, because it used to be you could start off with a pre-buy and then continue on to the conditional. Most of the time, too, if somebody's bringing it all the way from, obviously not as many from California bring it all the way to us for a pre-buy, but if somebody brings it down from Virginia or something for a pre-buy, usually they just want a fresh conditional anyway. So it was more... We ended up doing full conditionals at the end, so it was just easier to do it that way. But with the spar, one thing, and you usually don't find this with a conditional inspection either, because again, we don't pull the wings off anytime unless we feel there's a need to. But if you look at in between the spars, there's about a half-inch standoff. There's a gap that goes down through. If you look along the firewall down, you can see a gap in between the two spars, the main spar and the wing spar. We usually seal that off, because the hot air in there will actually travel through the wing spars and then up over the wing from the low pressure. The foam and the shear web of the center spar, we've seen those delaminate before because the foam actually shrinks. There's some that are flying around that way. It'd probably never be a structural issue, but usually we'll end up cutting out the glass, putting new foam in, and glassing it again. That's a really big common thing that we've seen over the last few years.
Let me stop you right there, because I got a comment to make. Airplane flies into Oshkosh one year. On the trailing edge, after the carry-through spar, over the trailing edge of the wing, behind the strake, it's black. He's got a white airplane with black streaks over there. And I said, what in the world happened? And he said, oh, that happened a month or so ago. I haven't had a chance to fix it. I said, well, what was it? He said, well, I had an engine fire. He said, I had an oil filter that I forgot to tighten. And it got oil in there, and it caught on fire. And, of course, the smoke, as John said, you've got a gap between the trailing edge of your fuel strake and the spar, where you can see a cut line there. Well, as the air passes over the top of the strake, it creates low pressure. So it's sucking air out through there. And if the only place the air can come from is inside your engine compartment, and you got a fire and you got smoke, it's going to exit out that area. So it's all black where it got soot. But he got the fire out, or whatever. The fire went out. And I said, well, what kind of damage did that do? He said, well, what you're seeing. He said, it's just black. I said, but it's fire. It had to be black from something. Did you pull the wing and inspect anything? No, it's been flying for the last 10, 15 hours. It's not the problem. And that's the way he left it. He left Oshkosh with that black streak on top of the trailing edge of the wing, just after of the carry-throughs, or the fuel strakes, because he'd had a fire. And you say, that's crazy. Why would you want to continue to fly an airplane where that could be a serious problem? I mean, you heat up those spars and they get soft. You could do permanent damage. I don't know. As far as I know, the airplane's still flying. But the airplane's way overbuilt, as most of you know. I think the only way you're ever going to destroy your airplane is to crash, hit a mountainside or something. Yes, sir.
So in a case like that, you put like a bead of silicone right at the.
There's several ways to seal it, but if you seal it right at the engine compartment area, rather than the top of the strays, where that air can escape out through the area, because the wings are bolted to a strake, and that gap in there is where that air is sucked out. Seal that off.
With
and
what?
then you're
What do
okay.
you use?
Well, you can use asbestos stuff. You can use that rubber stuff that we use for the, you're familiar with it for baffling. It's a red silicon stuff. Anything to seal, I mean, you don't have to have a perfect seal, but you got to stop that airflow from going out there. Because otherwise you're going to have heat going out of the engine compartment always. And that heat will soften the foam behind that carry-through spar, and you'll have a soft spot. If you have the wings off, you can tap it and tell instantly that you've got a soft spot on that flat surface of the carry-through spar. But again, if you wanted to buy a used airplane and you found one that you liked, if I bought it, as an example, first thing I'd do is pull the wings, pull the canard, and start looking for things like that, looking for damage that might have happened. Now, obviously the seller's not going to let you do that. He's going to say, I don't want you to pull the wings off my airplane. Well, that's up to you. I mean, if you want to buy it as is and do it when you get home, that's okay. But I would certainly do that personally and look and see if there's been any damage to that carry-through spar through the heat or any other damage. Or start looking for those things like glass layups. Get the manual with the airplane. You'd be surprised how many used airplanes have thrown the manual away. So the new buyer says, well, how do I fix it? Well, look at the manual. What manual? They didn't get one. Now what are you going to do? You don't have any way to fix it. We have a way to tell you how to fix it. And you can go online and get all the instructions that you need off your computer. But you got to be an airplane owner to do that, yeah.
So that leads me, because I was going to ask, should you get the build manual? Because, I watch Matt do it, and, he documents everything. So if somebody does these things that you're talking about, like just leave out the fuel baffles
Right.
or not do this layup and stuff, do they just sign it anyway, even though they didn't do it? Or they say,
Problem
I'm not going to
is-
do that and cross it out?
You don't know.
Okay.
If the manual isn't there, normally the manual's got places you check off what you've done.
Right.
And what I used to do is clip the page off once everything was done on that page. After you've checked everything off, clip the edge so that you don't have to page through your manual to figure out where you left off. However, a lot of people now are using our website, and if you're a builder, you get the information to get onto our builder's manual, and you can look at it on your computer. And there's no place to check it off. If they have a manual, it should be with the airplane, and it should have those things checked off. But you'd have to know really what you're looking for, because a lot of that stuff is just words, and you'd have to know.
Yeah.
If you looked at the part, you'd say, okay, I can see that.
I'm just wondering, the things you found that people just decided not to do, did you get an opportunity to look back at the manual and see?
No.
Okay, just curious.
No, if it isn't done, we know it wasn't done.
Yeah.
Period.
A good rule of thumb with experimentals is, to me personally, an experimental with less than 100 hours on it's worth a lot less than an airplane with 100 hours or more. Now, take that 500-hour airplane we were talking about, though, doesn't really fit the realm. But for an airplane that is inside phase one, unless the guy ran into a medical issue or, sometimes people say, well, they're just financially strapped. That kind of gives you a red flag of, towards the end, quality type thing for certain parts. But if they're getting rid of it outside of phase one a lot of times and they're still flying other airplanes, usually the airplane probably scared them. And it could, be a simple fix, or we get a lot of people that do we call it the post-buy inspections. We get the great deal, we bring it down, and, like you were talking about now, you got $30,000 of an engine overhaul that you didn't know about. One guy brought an SE in, got a good deal on it. It was a turbocharged 360 off a helicopter, I think, because it was like a baby blue painted engine. The owner he bought it from never told him you had to put an additive in every time you do an oil change. So the turbo actually ate itself in the first 5 hours he owned it and trashed the rest of the engine, basically. So, there's EAA chapters all around the country. So having somebody, they don't have to be a velocity expert. That somebody that's built one obviously is going to know a lot more. But somebody with composite knowledge obviously helps a lot too.
Yeah, find somebody in your EAA chapter All you guys are EAA members, are you not? If you're not, you should be. There's a lot of information available through EAA, and there's chapters all over the country. Most of those chapter members most of those chapters would have a member who's built a composite airplane, either a Glass Air or a Lance Air or a Long Easy, Very Easy. All of those are compatible, and people who built those airplanes, if they build a halfway decent one, could look at a velocity and find flaws, perhaps, in some of the things that went on. I mean, if one of the things you can do is sight down the trailing edge of the winglet. If one is this way and one is this way, ooh, there must be something wrong. He must have put a real twist in those wings to have them off that much. It just shouldn't happen. I mean, that's a very simple fix. Okay, yeah, it's in line. At least he did that right. But there's some things you won't know about. If you build it yourself, you'll know. If you don't build it yourself, you have to verify.
On the fast build kits, the strike is already on the airplane. It's
No.
already.
No.
It's not.
On a fast build kit, you're assured that the wings are done right. You're assured that our control systems are done right. Not that you have the authority you need, right, left, up, and down, but at least structurally they're good. There's no problem. We don't put the strakes on because we can't ship the airplane with a carry-through spar.
I got you. The spar's put on after you ship it.
Yes, and we can index it. If the customer says, could you index it? So we can install it, get it centered, get it parallel, and all that kind of stuff, and then put whatever blocks in there we need to make sure it's straight, and then put some screws in there to hold it, and then we can take it out and then put it back in. Then the customer can do the final glassing and make it, for sure, make it structurally correct. We're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to leave it open here for some questions because I'm sure you got some.
The fast build kit is a good start.
Well,
I mean,
you're assured
if
at least
you get an airplane that's had a fast build kit.
Yeah.
You can,
We've done our share of the work properly. Some of the older airplanes, before we ever had this fast build stuff, were built by the owners because we didn't have fast builds at all. We had just kits, and the owners had.
And in the fast builds, you put the windows in too.
Yes, windows, windshield, doors are installed, the locking pins are in, all that stuff is done.
I know this hasn't come up in any of the forums, but, this weekend, but could you briefly talk about the Builders Assistance Program?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. You want help in building your airplane, come to us before you pick up the airplane and we'll help you. We'll assign a full-time person with you and with your airplane, so all the work that's being done is on your own airplane, so you get progress in addition to learning the techniques that we use, and it's just a head start, what it is. It gets you started in the process. You remember on a fast-built airplane, if you put 4 hard points in it and set the seat in the airplane, you could sit in there and make airplane noises the next day. And that's important because people who build airplanes sometimes get to the point where they're just tired of it. It still don't look like an airplane. They've been working on it for a year and a half and it don't look like an airplane. On the fast builds, it looks like an airplane when you get it. And it's on the landing gear and it can be rolled in and out. Put a seat in it and sit there and make noise. And it's an encouragement. It really is to a lot of builders. Fast builds will help that process in making sure everything is good and right, but it doesn't guarantee that everything is going to be correct. It's just better. But our assist program gives you the chance to learn a lot of the techniques that we have been using for years, and we know how to do it. Yeah.
John, you mentioned a couple of issues that you check before you go on a first flight or critical systems. Is there anything else that's really important to look at and easy to check without dragging it to a mechanic?
Yes and no, but that just kind of goes by experience from doing it. Somebody that's looked at dozens of them is going to know a lot quicker than somebody that it's the first airplane they built, the first time they've gone and looked at it. So the big thing, and I yell at some of our, or not yelling, but I get mad at some of the guys in our shop sometimes when I first started working here, I, besides the flying, got stuck doing a lot of the grunt work, mechanics, so gear repairs, doing brake bearings and brake pads, which nobody else really wants to do on the airplanes. So he was always a big proponent on it doesn't matter if you put a cowling screw in, somebody else goes through with a screwdriver and checks it. And there's a lot of people that are always afraid that somebody's going to scold them for doing something wrong. It's much better to get scolded on the ground than it is when you're at 10,000 feet and you start hearing a flutter or something in the back of the airplane and look over and something's flopping around. So somebody double checking you. When I go out and do a pre-flight for a test flight, I have a notepad with me. I literally start from the nose of the airplane and start tracking back. I don't like anybody else around the airplane when I'm doing it. And I don't like after I passed a certain point somebody going behind me and changing anything until I already went through it. Because you can have too many chefs in the kitchen, especially when it comes to that, because somebody can be, Rick could be up doing some avionic stuff up in the front and, loosen a bracket to the battery tray, for example, to move something out of the way, and I already went through there and checked it, and if you don't go back and check it again or remember to, it can cause issues. So I'd make a full list, and it could be, I've gone out to airplanes and had 0 squawks, which usually isn't a big thing, and I've gone out and spent 18 hours over 2 days fixing rigging and loose screws and things like that. Most guys are pretty good ahead of time getting that because they get all their buddies around the hangar and they have the airplane pretty good when it comes out because you give them a list of stuff to check. Gear operation is a big one. Some people spend a lot or worry about they don't retract the gear. It's been on the owner's forum a lot recently about if we change tires, it doesn't matter if it's the same tire coming off the airplane on, you do a retract test. There's tolerances in there. So you can take off. Nothing's worse than when you go to put the gear down and nothing moves. So you can have the same tire, and we've had that. Some of our guys are really good at getting the spacing around the wheel wells, and then you'll see some of them that are just, you can't even spin the tire up in there. They get them so tight. So when you change a set of tires, and if you change brands, it even gets worse sometimes. Gear legs are something else you can check. You should check every pre-flight anyway, but on pre-buy ones, the gussets up front, because you don't want your first landing to actually be a smooth one. The gear falls out because somebody else compromised the gear, and then also cracks on the torsional wrap because of somebody locking the brakes and cracking them. So back of the airplane kind of feels loose and kind of sluggish if the torsional wraps get cracked. So wing bolts are another one. Because when you're building your airplane, a lot of guys will use either jam nuts on the wings or take the actual lock nuts that come with the kit and ream them out so that they can put the wings on and off fast. Again, you don't want to have a nut come off on you in flight. So.
Also, those bolts, the threads on an AN bolt are not too long. They're fairly short. And you can often bottom out the nut before it gets tight. And an easy way to check that is when you got it torqued to where you think it's about right, go to the other side of the bolt, the non-lock nut side, and if it can turn, and you haven't got it tight, the bolt is tight on the nut, but the bolt isn't tight in its squeezing capacity, and we see that a lot. And that's usually where you see a squeak in the wing when you pick it up and down. If it squeaks, it's because that one of those bolts is not, it's bottomed out. We call it bottomed out. So it need an extra washer or whatever. Okay, any more questions we have? We're running over time. You'll probably, if we've got your name, and if I don't, be sure we have it in your address, because I'm going to send everybody a letter. It's actually a questionnaire. How often should we do this sort of thing? Should we do it annually, every other year, every 5 years? Never. Have you learned anything? If not, let us know about it. If there's things that we should add to these little discussions, should we make them shorter and add more things? Should we make them longer? Run it longer? 5 days instead of 3, 2 days instead of 3, whatever. I'm going to ask a lot of questions in this questionnaire. Fill it out honestly, and you don't have to sign it. I don't care whether you sign it or not, because I just want to know your reactions to doing this. And if it's helpful, we'll do it all often. If it does you no good, then tell me. I didn't learn anything because I already knew everything. That's what Wolf told me.
Brooke, I only got one question for you. What's the ratio of velocipoxy?
It's something. Anyway, keep us informed of what you would like in these things in the future, and that way we will be able to better prepare for you the next time. because it's kind of, this stuff is kind of new to me.
Yeah, this is my first time meeting pretty much most of you, and I've had a great weekend, and I, for one, would like to be back here next year. So I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who participated, and, you know, these guys, they didn't charge us this year for this, and I have paid far more for conferences that I didn't learn nearly as much or meet so many cool people and have such a great time. So I hope we're back here next year. I hope I get to see all of you again. And thank you all for coming and participating, because this was great. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.